Reforming the bureaucracy, there have been 11 major attempts in the 20th century to reform these organizations and agencies within the government. The most recent one has been the National Performance Review, also known as NPR, and it is a plan to reinvent government. This was led during the Clinton administration by Al Gore, and they wanted to emphasize customer service. And in the past, most of the reforms had revolved around increasing executive control over these agencies. So now the emphasis should be on the customer. And when we talk about a customer, those are the citizens who have to deal with these particular agencies. So when they were looking at this National Performance Review, they thought the main problem with bureaucracy that it had become too centralized. It had too many rules. There were too little concern with making the programs work, and way too much concern about avoiding scandal, and once again increasing all of those different things that we talked about, or the different pathologies, whether it's red tape or waste or conflict, imperialism, all of those. So what the NPR called for was less centralized government and more employee initiative. So take it away from the government itself and allow the employees to have use their brains and use some more common sense. Fewer detailed rules and more customer satisfaction. Going back up that I just skipped, as far as too many rules and stuff like that, your textbook talks about how the General Services Administration had to submit a 9-page document that described when they wanted to purchase an ashtray. So this document had to describe an ashtray and specify how many pieces it must break into if this ashtray was hit with a hammer. And to me that just sounds like it's unbelievably moronic, but those are the things that they had to do. And then the NPR, once again, Congress leaves a lot of the executive administration up to the executive branch, but they come in after the fact and create legislation, the Government Performance and Results Act, that kind of backs up this idea of the National Performance Review, where agencies had to set goals, they had to measure their performance and report on the results. Bush kind of coattails to that and goes on with the performance assessment rating tool. And then in conclusion for the whole entire chapter, the conclusion of this in your textbook talks about that it's the rivalry between the president and Congress for control of the bureaucracy that makes the bureaucrats nervous about irritating either branch. And so bureaucrats, their loyalties are split between Congress and the president. And so they issue these rules designed to avoid getting into trouble, even if these rules make it harder for them to do their jobs. And it says, and we've talked about unified versus divided government, matters become even worse during periods of divided government, where you have the president in one party and either one or both houses of Congress in another party. We do know from studying the legislative branch that some policy can get done. Things can be accomplished when you have divided government. But the bigger effect is on how we're going to implement it. So we have lots of policies in place, and depending on what president takes office, policies about even the legalization of marijuana, there are laws against it, and then Obama says, I'm going to enforce it one way, Donald Trump says, I'm going to enforce it another way. Intensifies the crossfire between the executive and the legislative branch, making bureaucrats dig into deeper layers of red tape to avoid getting hurt. So they are in the midst of all of this. They have to serve both masters, and so until we do something about that, the pathologies will live on.